TopLobsta Productions.
We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us modern-day slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, and wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. But then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days.
Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government releasing poison in the air.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is TopLobsta, the father of disinformation. And today we are continuing. It's not Friday. What is today? Today's Thursday?
It's Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday. Good God.
Wednesday's for the Lord.
Yeah, Wednesdays are for the Lord, guys. We are continuing the Book of Genesis series with Ed Mabrie. But before we get into that, a quick little announcement. If you guys are looking to watch the raw, unedited version of Bohemian Grove, it's 12 hours of content. It currently lives on patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. Sign up for the $10 tier. Gain access to all 12 hours of the insanity. No cuts or anything like that. It's just one straight stream for 6 hours and another one for 6 hours the next day. And if you guys are into that sort of thing, if you feel like you missed out, well, head on over to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. Also, a bunch of perks over there like ad-free viewing experiences, engaging in the live chat when we go behind the paywall, and access to the backlog content. We did the math the other day. We're trying. I don't know if you guys have been noticing on YouTube and on Rumble. We're chipping away. We're chipping it away. We're like
up.
25 episodes behind. That's crazy. 25 episodes behind on Rumble, on YouTube. So that's when I talk about the huge backlog that you guys are getting access to on Patreon. That is what I'm talking about. So patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad for all of those goodies. All right, guys, joining us today on a Wednesday, but it's better Wednesday than not, right? I suppose that's how it goes. It's Ed Mabrie, and we are back to continue the Book of Genesis discussion. But before we do, Ed, where can everybody find your work and support you?
Sure. So first of all, we have to apologize for being late. Someone put in, yes, Black people time. No, it's called Colored People's Time. It's CPT.
Yeah,
so,
we fall under that banner too. I believe somebody said if anybody on this show was white, fully white, then it would be on time. But
and I gotta apologize. No, but you know what though? Is Sam white? I guess Armenian is not really white either. Right?
Yeah, he fluctuates between Armenian, Italian, but
he's not white either. But I feel their pain because I was trying to listen to one of his shows. I think Broken Sim, and he was like, "Oh, it's live." And I was in the chat at like whatever time it was supposed to go on. And he was like 10 minutes, 15 minutes late. And I was like, it's a feeling of uncertainty. Like, am I in the right place? Are they ever going to come? It's a horrible
did I find
feeling.
The right stream. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was totally me. I tried to be on time, and it just, I don't know, something genetic. I was going to log in at like 15 minutes early, but then like stuff kept happening. My kids were screwing around. But anyway, here we are.
That's what he said. Ed, when he showed up, he was like, I was planning on being here 15 minutes early. But instead, he just sat at the computer and his hand wouldn't click the button. It just wouldn't activate to click the button on the mouse until...
All my ancestors were like holding my hand back. Like, no.
Not yet. No, the truth is we talked for like 15 minutes. You were here at 1, exactly at 1. But we talked because we don't respect the audience. But tell them where they can find you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and Fridays, isn't Friday the 4th? That's why we're not doing it this Friday. I was going to book it. I'm like, wait, that's a holiday, so
that's exactly what it is. Yeah, we had a couple of shows that we mistakenly booked and had to cancel a few, but we're still going to end up working on Friday, but in the morning. But where can everybody find your work?
Where can you find me? So faithbyreason.net is my legacy site. That's where you'll find like all my material that I've been doing for a decade plus. I need to update that. Actually, I have a few more things I need to add that I've published since then. And that's because I put most of all my new stuff goes on my Patreon. So that's where I am recommending everyone go. That's where you will get everything's going to drop first there. Actually, the next Genesis the episode's going to drop. It should drop today. I mean, I was editing it last night. I should be done editing it today. So part 8 of the Genesis series should be up later today or early tomorrow at the latest. But you also get the Q&As there. You ask me questions. I do videos on them. I have one I'm planning on doing this week on some questions that I got. Also, you get bonus episodes you're not going to find anyplace else. And if you go to the second tier, then you can be part of the monthly Bible study where we go through the entire Bible in 12 months, once a month, from the supernatural point of view, looking at things from the spiritual standpoint, which is, again, 80% of the Bible. So if you're missing that, it may be why you're having difficulty understanding what's going on there. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And also on my free feeds, I'm on X and Instagram and Facebook and all those other places, but that's and YouTube, of course. And like you guys, I'm behind on my Rumble. I need to put up some more Rumble videos. I got to start getting that stuff up there regularly. But yeah, those are the free feeds, but Patreon is where it's at, and faithbyreason.net.
Yeah, I was just listening to maybe a couple of days ago your latest on the audio. I forget exactly what it was about, but you were covering like I think maybe you were talking about the fallen. You were covering Daniel chapter 10 and different prophetic visions and prophecies like that. Good episode. I would suggest people go check it out and subscribe there. So yeah,
because it might have been on Spotify or one of those. Yeah, if it was just audio, it's probably one of because I'm on all the audio channels as well. I think whatever I put it on, it just shoots it out to everything.
Yeah, thank God for services like that, because if not, I don't think we would exist anywhere. We would go live and then it would just be lost to obscurity. But yeah, those video platforms are a little bit more demanding, and so just by nature they end up being a little bit behind. I don't know about 25 episodes behind. Like I said, that's where we are right now, but we're working diligently to try to catch that up. Ed, we were talking a little bit before the show, and we were talking about Tucker Carlson's conversation and just the state of Israel and what's going on. And you said that kind of folds into the bigger picture of what we're going to talk about today. So where do you want to start in regards to that?
Yeah, so we're talking about Genesis because I'm doing my Genesis series, but we on this show we just kind of riff back and forth on some theoretical stuff as I'm kind of putting things together, because I'm still on chapter 2, Genesis 8 episodes in. So there's a lot of stuff to come, but it's such a complex book, and there's so many aspects of it that people are interested in, because again, if you understand Genesis, you understand the entire Bible, because it's all there, including the promises to Israel. And I wanted to talk about some of that on this show because, we very recently, throughout the month of June, there's a lot of stuff happening in the geopolitical world with Israel, Iran, the United States, where all these things fit. And so I've gotten a lot of questions from my followers, a lot of whom are either new Christians or Christians who lapsed and are coming back, and they appreciate me and I appreciate them, but they appreciate the fact that I just talk straight. There's no pretentious here. I'm not, all high holy kind of, you can't, like, I'm not a real person. I think I talk like a real person. There's no bullshit, basically. I just speak plain. And I think a lot of younger Christians appreciate that. And a lot of Christians who kind of fell away and still believe in God, but don't want to get caught up in all the liturgy and all that nonsense and, wearing robes and collars and all that stuff. I think they appreciate what I do. And of course, I appreciate them as well. So they've been asking me for my perspective on this. And what should the church's position be regarding the modern state of Israel, Jews in general, Israelites, Hebrews, whatever you want to call them? And so I thought that there we go. So let's just start with this, because this gets into the Genesis aspect of it. So I'm sure many of you saw the interview between Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson, where Cruz was saying that, as he learned in Sunday school, if you're a Christian, you have to support Israel. And Tucker was saying, well, does that mean the modern state of Israel? What does that mean? And where's the mandate come from? And, it comes from Genesis chapter 12, I think verse 3. But he couldn't quote it directly, which tells me that he's kind of parroting what he's heard elsewhere. And I know that I'm not a big politics guy. You guys are more into politics than I am, but from what I understand, he gets a pretty significking chunk of money from certain lobbyists.
Right. Many such cases. Ed, let me ask you about that though. So it's like, let's say even the government of Israel or the state of Israel, what are we exactly called to do when it comes to this notion of support? Like it would make sense to me if you were to say, yeah, sure, the government of Israel and the state of Israel are corrupt. But still pray for them to come to, the path of God, and to come to the recognition that, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. You know what I mean? So like that is a
Yeah.
form of support, is it not?
It is. So let's just look at the top. Do you mind pulling it up again? Because I want to look
Yeah.
at the definitions of these things, because this is really where it comes from. And then I want to get into Christian Zionists versus replacement theologists, which are the extremes of these. But let's just look at what this says. This is God's mandate to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So still pretty early on. He says, I'll make you a great nation. So he's talking about a nation. He says, I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. So first of all, let's talk about what these definitions of blessing and cursing is, because that's really important. I mean, without the right definition, I think I've said before here and elsewhere that most arguments and disagreements come from people having the same vocabulary but different dictionaries. So we need to agree on what these things mean biblically, not our opinions. So biblically speaking, blessings and cursings are start with words. Okay, to bless someone is to speak well of them. To curse someone means to speak ill or poorly of them. So that's the most denotative, but you can carry that over into a prophetic sense. It means saying something about them and then doing it, or saying or hoping these things happen to them. So
Right.
so if I were to bless you, I would say, hey, Top, you know what? I hope that you have a great day and your family is going to be great and you're just going to have a wonderful career. And and Raven, I hope that your house is great and that you prosper. All those, that's me speaking a blessing to you. I'm speaking well of you, and also in the prophetic sense, I'm wishing you well. And if I
Right.
have the
So
power
this
to do
is
something about it, I'm sorry.
this is like a spiritual thing, right?
Yeah,
It's not
it
like
is.
like to
It's
bless
words.
Israel isn't to go and like fund the government of Israel
Give
with
them, here's
material
money for
things.
bombs.
Yeah, here's money for bombs. Instead, it's a spiritual thing.
It is. That's what a blessing is. And it can, but remember, we talked about this before. I think we talked about it maybe last week, or at least I know we talked about it in the past, that when you speak things spiritually in one realm, you were speaking with the intention of them manifesting. So my blessing is for you guys to have all those great things I just said. That is me blessing you. Now, if I have the means to make it happen, if I say, I hope you get a new house, and then I happen to have the means to make it happen, and I get a couple $100,000, well, so be it. But the blessing was me saying it. Cursing is the same way. We look in the Bible, when someone is cursed, when God curses, he'll pronounce a judgment. When he cursed the Nakash, the serpent in the Garden of Eden, he said, on your belly you will go and you will eat dust, and so forth and so on. That was a curse. It was done with words, but because it was God doing it, everything God says is going to happen because he's God. And but when so to bless Israel is to speak well of them, but to speak well of them in the same light as God does. That's really important. Not to say Israel can do no wrong. That's not a blessing. That's actually foolish. Everyone does things wrong. I mean, if you look in the Bible, I said on a podcast that I did maybe about a week ago, that if speaking ill of Israel makes you anti-Semitic, then God's the biggest anti-Semite in history. If you read what he says about them in the Old Testament, if you read the book of Jeremiah, for example, where he says, you guys are stiff-necked, you're basically a bunch of jackasses, you keep screwing up, I'm going to divorce you, I'm going to strip you naked and throw you in the wilderness, kind of thing. That's if I were to say that about the current nation, I'd be labeled an anti-Semite. So it's not necessarily saying that they can do no wrong. What it means is, I think, closer to what you were saying, Raven, I want what God wants for you.
Yeah.
It says to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Well, the ultimate peace of Jerusalem is going to happen during the millennial reign. So when you say I'm praying for the peace of Jerusalem, you're praying for the return of Jesus to set up the millennial kingdom. When you say I hope that God's people come to Christ, I think that's probably the best blessing you can give them, is to say, most of them, there's plenty of Messianic Jews, of course, who've been saved, but most of Israel is either secular or still in Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism. And I pray that you know who your Messiah is and you come to salvation. That's blessing Israel. Well, cursing him is the opposite, saying that, when certain people in certain other countries say, death to you, I hope you wipe you off the face of the planet, you shouldn't exist, that sort of thing. That's cursing. So those are blessings and cursings.
Okay.
I'll take it a step further. So all right, we're supposed to bless Israel like with our words, and like I understand that, but Jesus seemed to curse Israel with his words when he curses the fig tree. That's a literal curse on the tree. It dies, but he curses it because he's like, you're showing leaves, but you have no fruit. He's not talking about it's. I mean, sure, maybe he was angry with the tree, but I don't think he was angry with the tree.
Yeah,
I think he's
well, yeah, he did that. That was a symbol. He
yeah.
was showing that you look good, but you're not producing anything. So the curse he put on them, and the reason that God can do that is because God is 100% just. His justice is complete. If we try to do something harmful, we don't have enough information to actually execute that justice. So we're gonna screw it up, and we're gonna end up on the wrong side of justice. That's why we leave justice to God. So yeah, you're right, Top. That when he struck the fig tree, he was saying that because you were supposed to have fruit and you don't. Same thing with at the time Israel, they were supposed to be having fruit. They had a temple, they had the Pharisees, and they had all these holy men, but they weren't producing the fruit.
Yeah,
And so he
outwardly
said, well,
you're
you're not gonna produce
beautiful,
anymore.
but inside you're like a outwardly your tombs are nice, but you're filled with bones.
Right,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's a crazy curse to say to somebody.
It really is, because especially if you understand how Jewish people, Israelites, felt about death, because it was you were not allowed to touch something that was dead. That was not a part of the law. The law was you don't touch anything dead, and that's because when you
I'm sorry.
and it was because of superstition. It was
We're
because
praying
when
for
you touch,
David. We're praying for David.
I know, I saw it too. So because when you touch dead things, you can get disease. I mean, if there's a dead animal, you touch it, you're liable to get it. So that's why it was a practical thing. But because the Pharisees are very religious, they take a practical thing like don't touch dead stuff because you could get a disease from it, and say, oh well, it's unholy. We're too good for dead. So Jesus said, yeah, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. You're like if someone took a tomb and just painted over it. Yeah, that's what you guys are. On the surface, you look good, but inside, you're filled with dead men's bones. And that's why it's so funny when people say, oh, well, Jesus was the nicest, sweetest guy who ever walked the earth. They never said anything bad about anyone. That's because you're reading the Bible in that polite King James, where everything, has that thou and thee and blessed art thou.
Yeah.
No, Jesus said, he calls them a generation of vipers, a descendants of serpents. He says, you're of your father, the devil. It was equivalent of being cursed out. Jesus did not hold back.
It's worse than being cursed out. I'd rather you curse me out than say like that to me. That's wild.
Yeah.
It's a generational curse. What are you
I'll
doing?
tell you what, though, it's a great way to engage in that conversation where a lot of people, especially like boomers, right, will just say blanketly like, "Oh, we're supposed to support Israel," and it's like, what does that mean, support? And you have that conversation. Do you think that God cares about you supporting their military moves or supporting their economy or any of these things? It's like, no, God cares about the spiritual. So,
Right.
and what's ultimately the best thing to wish upon somebody spiritually is that they come to Christ. So, yeah.
Yes. So taking it back to the verse, that word bless is not the same word as support the way we mean it. Like you were just saying, Raven. So blessing means to speak well of them, hope for the best for them, speak the best for them. But it also says that I will make you a great nation, because then you have the other extreme where I was, listening to, I think it may have been Candace Owens who was commentating on the Cruz Carlson interview, and she was saying, or she brought on some other Catholic guy, and that her hyper Catholicism is really raising the hackles. Not because I have a problem with Catholic people. That's fine. My wife was raised Catholic. My best friend was raised Catholic. That's not the problem. The issue is that for her, it's been so sudden and so extreme that I don't trust that. But anyway, she had on some Catholic commentator who came on and said, well, that only applied to Abraham, to, whatever, 4,000 years ago. And so it applies to no one else. And so if you say that, unless you were living during the time of Abraham, then this prophecy does not apply to you. And that's not true. That's the other extreme. God says, I will make you a nation.
Right.
And so it applies to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whoever they might be. We'll get into that in a second. But nation does not necessarily, and Tucker did bring up a good point where he says, when he asked Ted Cruz, does this mean the borders of current Israel and the current government? And Ted Cruz wasn't astute enough or just didn't bother to understand that it doesn't refer to a particular government. That word nation, when you get to the actual word, and when it gets to Greek, that word is ethnos, which is where we get the word ethnic. So that when God talks about nations, he's talking about groups of people, not necessarily borders. Although, yes, that land is also Israel. And that's something else that's very important, because people try to separate the two, separate the land versus the people. No, they're both Israel. God made a covenant with that land. That real estate is sacred to God because it's his area that he set aside for his people. Now, that doesn't, and the borders, we've talked about this before, the current borders are not the land grant that God gave originally to the Israelites when they left Exodus. They were supposed to have everything from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the Euphrates. That's a huge area that they don't currently occupy. And they could have taken it, but they decided they didn't want to keep fighting to take the promised land. They're like, we got enough, we're good. And they just left the rest of the land to their enemies, and their enemies still occupy to this day. So it is both, but it doesn't necessarily mean the governments, because we know that all the governments weren't great because they got exiled. The 10 northern tribes got taken over by the Assyrians, and then the 2 southern tribes who did well for a while, they got taken over by the Babylonians, and they got kicked out of the land because that land is important. So all that to say that the blessings and cursings are intended for the people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and for the land that God allotted for them. So speak well of those. If you speak poorly of them, then God will. So the other part is he will bless you. God will speak well of you prophetically if you bless them, and he will speak ill of you if you speak ill of them. But if you're neutral, well, then he's not going to do one or the other. So that's what's really important to understand. That's what it means, the blessings and cursings.
Top, do you think we could bring up that, because I've actually never seen the clip, the Tucker and Ted Cruz clip. I heard that it went pretty negatively for him. It's been a wild time for everything that's going on in Israel and with Iran. I mean, when we were on stage at Bohemian Grove is when Trump basically attacked Iran. I think it was like three missile strikes on 3 different nuclear facilities allegedly, and then he makes a tweet or a Truth Social post about it, and so things have been getting really wild in regards to, I guess, proximity to World War III or something like that. But this Ted Cruz interview, did this happen before that, Top, or after that? It was really
before.
close. It was like
17th.
right before though, right?
Yeah, I think it was shortly before.
I'll play a clip, but I don't know if this is exactly going to be. So he's like questioning Ted about different geopolitical things, and Ted's squirming. But let's see what happens here.
I don't know the population at all. No, I don't know the population. You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple? How many people living around? 92 million. Okay. Yeah. How could you not know that? I don't sit around memorizing population tables. Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government. Why is it relevant whether it's, it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant? Because if you don't know anything about the country... I didn't say I don't know anything about the country. What's the ethnic mix of Iran? They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay, it's not even... You don't know anything about Iran. So okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran. You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government. You're the one who claims anything about the country. No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the one who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad. You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump? Yes, I do. Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that... We're carrying out military strikes today. You said Israel was. Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're...
That's an interesting slip of the tongue as well.
Yeah. I think that sounds like he knew that they were about to bomb him, right? Yeah,
and it's also like the who is we. I don't think it's going to get to the. I don't think this is the part where he says about Israel. What did he say about Israel? He said he learned it.
Go ahead, Todd.
No, go ahead. No,
I'm saying I think from the clip that I saw, and I saw that clip too. I thought was interesting. I thought it was contentious, but he says in Sunday school, I learned that you are to support Israel. And Tucker says, well, does that mean that what is Israel? Are we to just, does that mean the modern state of Israel and that sort of thing? So, and then Tucker asked him, okay, well, where does the Bible say that? And And he said, well, I don't know off the top of my head. And, and then Tucker said, well, it's in Genesis, but does that apply to the modern state of Israel?
Yeah.
It feels like to me that this is something that we've been kind of tracking for a while. We bring it up on a lot of shows pretty often, but this idea that we are moving towards this prophetic, world turning on Israel. And I think, like, even though Ted Cruz is incorrect in that instance, and that Tucker issues a pretty valid question about what are we talking about, the state, the government of Israel, it all adds to this. If you're kind of a low information person and you're just getting this you should be fed up with the Jews message that's really prevalent right now, and it's really gripping the culture in a huge way. This is just another one of those straws that's aiming to break the camel's back. This moment right here where you might come away from this, instead of being like, this conversation that we're having, which is blessing Israel, saying that ideally what you should hope for the people of Israel is that they come to the conclusion that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. That's the ultimate goal, right? But instead, if you stop short of that, it's just another thing that makes you incredibly fed up with Israel, their representation in our government, the Jews and their representation in our institutions. And I feel like this is all just pointing in that direction. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm too close to it, but that's what it feels like.
Good. So let me bring this up, because this is something, because when I did my original video on this, someone did call me on to be really direct and precise about, does this Abrahamic promise, the blessings and cursings, to what degree does it apply to us today? And did it end dispensationally when the time of the patriarchs ended? And it's actually, that's not an invalid point, because we talked about before, I don't like using the term dispensations because it gets people all weird religiously. But there are different eras of time where God dealt with the world differently. Adam and Eve, tree of knowledge of good and evil. We don't deal with that today. That we don't have access to that. Babel was a different time. We aren't under the law anymore. As far as being close to God, we're not under the law. So God does not hold me accountable to not eat shellfish and pork. Thank God, because I just had some pork belly the other day. So does that mean that into another era was a time of the patriarchs? And in the time of the patriarchs, God dealt with the world through the descendants of Abraham. And blessings and cursings were there, and it could be argued that that period of time was fulfilled with their time in Egypt, because originally, if you recall the story, we'll get into it, way down the line in my Genesis series. The Jacob, who was renamed Israel, his son Joseph became the prime minister of Egypt because he had a prophetic vision from God. Well, actually, he interpreted a dream of Pharaoh. God gave him the interpretation that there will be a time of abundance and a time of famine. And so Joseph said, during the time of abundance, store up all your grain, and then there will be the 7 years of famine. And because of that, because Egypt did that, they were able to get through this worldwide famine, and they became really wealthy. And Joseph became the prime minister. He brought his people, his brothers, and with the other tribes down to Egypt. And the Pharaoh dealt with them really well. He put them up in the best land right on the Nile. And because of that, Egypt prospered. So God spoke well of them and good things happened to them. But then a Pharaoh came along later who did not acknowledge what Joseph did. And he enslaved the Israelites. And we have the whole Exodus thing where obviously there were curses happening. So you could argue denotatively that whole era was fulfilled. That Egypt, he said, I'll bless those nations who bless you. Egypt blessed Israel. Egypt prospered. They became this is when Egypt became the dominant world empire. And then they treated them poorly and they lost it. And that was basically the beginning of the end of the Egyptian empire. And the next world empire was the Assyrians. So
that goes back to what you were saying the other day about like justice and kind of like zeroing things out, the playing field, kind of, making you go back to zero effectively.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what happened. But then the next era was the era of the law. So the question is, does the era of, and then of course after the era of the law is the era of the church, which we're in now, which we're not obeying the law. So since we're not obeying the law, which was the previous era, are we also required to do the blessings and cursings? Now, I'm not saying that it's irrelevant. I'm saying I think it's a question to ask.
Well, but generally speaking, we're called to pray for people, right? And we're called to spread the gospel. So
Here's a
ultimately it
question.
kind of leads in the same place.
In the book of Psalms where it says, I think it's quoted again in the New Testament too, but the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. What does that mean? Because
that's Jesus. Jesus was the builders were considered Israelites, because Paul says this all throughout the New Testament. And I'm going to get to this in a second, because I don't want people to think that Israel's like completely out of the picture. But Paul says that salvation was for the Jew first, not because God didn't like Gentiles, but because he was fulfilling the prophecy. God promised that through the ethnic Jewish people, the ethnic Israelites, the Messiah would come. And he did. Jesus was physically, in his physical body, he was a descendant of Judah, of the royal tribe. So the gospel was preached first to the Jewish people. It was for the first 10 years. It wasn't until Acts chapter 10 where God basically said, okay, it's time to preach to the Gentiles, that Peter started doing that. And of course, Apostle Paul became the apostle to the Gentile. So when you the verse you just quoted, that the builders rejected the cornerstone, they rejected Jesus. Jesus was the fulfillment of the law. He was the whole reason for the law. So the cornerstone is actually, we look at cornerstone in our buildings where like on the bottom of the building in the corner where you start building. No, it was actually in that vernacular, it meant the top of the pyramid. It was the capstone.
That's interesting,
because the capstone of the pyramid was usually gold. Go ahead.
That's actually how it exists within Freemasonry as well. So it's the top of the archway is where the cornerstone lies. And interestingly enough, it has this correlation to Cancer, the Tropic of Cancer. That is where the light of God comes through. And apparently we all, they have this idea. It's like we all enter through the Tropic of Cancer. We enter through the cornerstone. And it's also my son is playing Kingdom Hearts the other day. And at one point you're on this mission and you're looking for the Cornerstone of Light, interestingly enough. So it's riddled. That seems to be hugely important in all things, but it's interesting that, that Jesus is the cornerstone. And then these other things.
So he's the top. Right. So if the cornerstone is at the very top of the pyramid, or any kind of, obviously the occults have corrupted it. But if you look at the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk, which has a pyramid at the top, originally I think it was was it silver or something, or gold or something like that?
I know that there's this whole theory about the tips of pyramids. That cornerstone, I guess, if that's what we're calling it, is was made of, or gold plated, covered in gold, something of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. So Jesus was the pinnacle. He was the cornerstone. He was the top of it, and they rejected him, and he became.
I might be actually using the wrong terminology here. Shout out to the doctor who says the keystone. I believe it is the keystone. Okay. But in Kingdom Hearts they're calling it the Cornerstone of Light. But yeah, the keystone I think is also the phrase that I'm looking for. So my mistake.
Right. Yeah. So going back to the verse that Top quoted, that the stone that the builders rejected, Jesus in his first advent became the cornerstone, who in the second advent, of course, he's going to come back and he's going to have his millennial reign and then his everlasting kingdom. So he's the ultimate king. So that's what that meant. Okay. So I want to talk about the two. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just thought it was I thought that scripture was, I know it was about Jesus. I just wasn't sure if that's about is that like a replacement that they're talking about? Like, yeah, I thought that like being gifted to the Gentiles, is that then is that blessing passed on, or is that blessing still kept for the Jews? Like, you know what I mean? This prophecy, like.
When you look at Ephesians and Galatians, especially Galatians, it talks about how the Gentile church was grafted in to Israel. And if any of you guys have done any type of botany, working with plants or anything like that, you can take a branch from another plant and cut it and cut into the main tree or the main the trunk of something and put that branch into it, and it'll start growing. So the Gentiles are called like a wild olive plant, just out there growing wild, that was grafted into the cultivated olive tree, which was Israel. So that's not a replacement; it's an addition. So let's talk about those two extremes. Let's talk about replacement theology versus Christian Zionism, because anytime you have extremes, you're going to have flaws on both, and both are flawed. So replacement theology, in a nutshell, is the idea that when the Jewish leadership rejected Jesus and sent him to the Romans to be crucified, that God rejected them. And he says, you're no longer my people. I'm done with you. And now the church replaces Israel, and the church gets all the blessings of Israel. And of course, there's the fringe aspect of that, which even goes further, which is like the whole 10 lost tribes stuff, which I've done videos on it. Those tribes were never lost. They knew who they were. They, when they were supposedly lost during the conquest by the Assyrians, 400 years later, they come back to Israel for Pentecost, because Peter says he addresses the entire house of Israel, which is the actual name of the northern tribes. The northern tribes were the house of Israel. The two southern tribes were the house of Judah. Peter blatantly says, I'm speaking to the house of Israel. They knew who they were. That's a whole other thing. Like, they dispersed, then they wandered their way into Europe, where they magically transformed from Middle Eastern Hebrews into blonde hair, blue-eyed Caucasians, because genetics works that way. And then they became Protestants that came over to America. So America is the new Israel, and Americans are, white Americans are the new Jews, which, okay, that's as silly as it sounds. But actual replacement theology is more mainstream. And again, that's the idea that God is no longer dealing with the Jews at all, that they've been put away, that God's just separated from them. They are basically meaningless as a nation, as an ethnicity. God's done with them. And this was actually started because I had when I did my video, when I talked about this, I had someone come in my comments and say, well, that's not really true. You're misrepresenting it. No one really believes that. Actually, they do. That did not start recently. Because the person told me that the idea of replacement theology was started by the Zionists in order to, as a kind of a stalking horse or a straw man argument. No, it started with Augustine, the church father in the 3rd century. He is the one who started the idea of replacement theology. Because remember that for the first couple of centuries, most Christians were Jewish, because that's where the disciples were Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. Gentiles were being proselytized, but during the 1st century, most Christians were Jews. But then by the 3rd century, it became the other way around, where as the gospel was spreading, and there's always been contention between Jews and Gentiles for a number of reasons. And Jews have always been considered, not always, but they've been considered sometimes not, second-class citizens for, again, a number of reasons we don't need to go into. But Augustine, it turns out, was, I don't know what to call him, anti-Semitic. I don't want to speak too ill of him, but he wasn't favorably disposed to the Jews. This was also the time when
we wonder why.
Sorry,
I wonder why. What were they doing?
Yeah, like I said, that's a whole other show. They've done some dirt. They're still doing dirt. I keep finding out, like, I got hip to a lot of stuff with the Kennedy assassination that I didn't know about, and I learned about that over the last few months. But anyway,
when you look at, you look into the time of the Jews, the Pharisee in Rome, and how, like, they had power, but they didn't. It was a political soft power that they'd use. They'd swing around a lot of influence, and the people were there trying to do some stuff, but it's just the same thing as today. They're like, the people are kind of trying to live. They're seeing a bunch of laws, and the people that are making these laws for them on top are influencing the actual people that carry out the law of the land. It's the same exact thing. When that video we just watched with Ted Cruz, where he's like, "we," I was like, that's an interesting slip of the tongue, because what do you mean by we? Like, the AIPAC, that but it's the same. It's just the same exact thing. It's frustrating. It's frustrating.
Yeah. And as I said, God spoke ill of them. Jesus spoke. You cannot read the Gospel of John, chapter 8, where Jesus is just ripping the Pharisees to shreds. And these were the high level religious leaders. And Jesus said, your traditions are making the Bible of none effect. You've made your tradition supersede the Bible. And ironically, that's what goes on with Catholicism, where they make their traditions supersede the Bible, which is why I find it so ironic that the Candace Owenses of the world get on their high horse and it's like, oh, well, you went to Sunday school because you believe this. I'm like, yeah, well, you believe whatever your priest tells you. You check your brain at the door whenever it comes to anything to do with the Bible. You won't think, you research everything else. And she's a very good researcher. But when it comes to theology, unless somebody with a collar or a robe says it, she won't believe it. And I'm like, so why do you decide to check your brain at the door when it comes to your theology, but you will research deeply and question everything else? Anyway, so back to Augustine. So because there was a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment, Augustine, one of the church fathers, decides he has a theology that of replacement, that the church replaced Israel. Israel does not have any place in God's prophetic plan anymore. It's all about the church. And there's a book out called From Augustine to Auschwitz, because a lot of the doctrines of Hitler and the Nazis start with Augustine, and then it goes all the way through Martin Luther. Because so you can start with Augustine, and then a couple centuries later, you have the beginning of the medieval church through Constantine, which evolves into what we call Roman Catholicism, and they were pretty much anti-Israel. All the Crusades were about the church taking back the Holy Land, that sort of thing, and then you get even with the Protestant Reformation, you have Martin Luther, who was virulently anti-Semitic. He wrote some like crazy stuff about the Jews. But again, who was he talking about? Because you have the whole Khazarian thing, and that's I know we've talked about that before, and that's a big deal. But so that whole idea of replacement theology goes back to the 3rd century and is frankly the mainstream position of most of the church. Not necessarily anti-Israelism, but the fact that the church is prominent and Israel is not. So that is not true. God is not done with Israel. Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, the Apostle Paul hammers home the fact that God is not done with him. They are, to put it in hockey terms, they're in the penalty box. Yes, they were blinded because they rejected their Messiah. But Paul blatantly says that blindness is temporary until the times of the Gentiles are over. That's the time we're in now. And when that time is over, then Israel is going to become very prominent again. That's in the tribulation, which is yet future. So what does that mean as far as the current nation of Israel is concerned? Well, they're still in the penalty box. If you look at Ezekiel 37, the dry bones prophecy, where God tells Ezekiel, he gives him a vision of this, basically a desert filled with dry, parched bones. And he says, preach to these dry bones. And he preaches to them, and they start to assemble together, and they get flesh on them, but they don't have a spirit. They're not alive. So he said that his nation is going to come back from all over the world, but there's not going to be a spirit in them. They're not going to be believers. And then at the end, when you have a king over them like David, that is Jesus in the millennial reign, they will get the spirit back and they will believe again. So I believe this is talking about the end of that tribulation period at Armageddon, when the secular Jews finally acknowledge their Messiah. So
that's interesting, because it almost feels like then preaching to them is like, not that it's a fool's errand, but it's like it's not going to work, but that it's an interesting pursuit. Because I just think about like Messianic Jews and their whole everything that they focus on is basically preaching that Jesus Christ was the Messiah to the Jews, so they consider themselves Jews. But I was just at a Messianic Jew wedding, and as they're getting married, the pastor, or I guess the rabbi, right, is just talking about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and all this other stuff, and I'm going, is it like, what even is you just say Jew, it's just confusing, you know what I mean? Like a Messianic Jew, the word Jew there is confusing because it's not, they believe in Jesus Christ, and then of course it seems that they're mission driven to preach that to modern day Jews, and so right. But is that a fool's errand, because they're not going to have that sort of veil, that spirit's not going to enter them again until potentially the millennial kingdom?
It's almost unfair. I have like more sympathy now than ever for that idea, because as somebody who had something in front of him but can't see it until something seemingly random happens, it almost seems unfair. It's like, oh, that's been there the whole time and I can't see it. But if that's what's happening to these people, it's like, and it's a strong delusion for them. Like, man, that sucks, dude.
Is it unfair? Is it unjust?
It's just, but it's not just for me to hate you because you've been blinded in such a way that's very annoying. Yeah, but like that, I guess that's where I'm at. It's weird.
Right.
It's weird.
Well, keep in mind that we're talking about a corporate blindness, and there will be a corporate acceptance. It doesn't mean that individuals, obviously, ethnic Jewish people. Yeah, a Messianic Jew is a person who considers themselves ethnically Jewish, but they believe in Jesus. Because there's two. I mean, there's following Judaism versus being ethnically Jewish. Like I could, if I wanted to, I could I could start following the Talmud or whatever, or I could start, just obeying only the Old Testament, and I would be Jewish in that sense. I mean, Sammy Davis Jr., who's a piece of crap, but he converted. You'd have a lot. You can convert to the religion.
I thought he converted to Caucasian. What have you seen?
Don't get me started.
I didn't know he was Jewish too. That's
he
crazy.
And a pedophile and all sorts of other things.
All kinds of things. Yeah,
oh man, yeah. If you listen to the lyrics of Candyman, and I can't listen to that song without cringing.
Candyman. Who's Candyman by?
No, that was a song by Sammy Davis Jr.
What?
His
I'm sorry.
His most famous song.
I thought we were talking about the baseball player. What's his name?
Sammy Sosa.
Sammy Sosa. I'm so ridiculous.
Yeah, he's
Sammy
definitely
Sosa.
white now. Yeah, I don't know
definitely
how he did
white.
that.
I thought we were talking.
No,
wow.
Sammy Davis Jr.
Sammy
with
Sosa.
Rat Pack with what's his name?
Oh
Sinatra.
my God! Please bring up Sammy Sosa, Top, because he's white now. I was like, he
Well,
made a bunch of
I'm older
conversions.
than you guys, so I remember when Sammy Davis Jr. was actually a thing.
Oh, that's so funny. Sammy Davis Jr. sounds like a baseball player.
Yeah,
There he is.
Sammy
He's totally
Sosa.
white now.
I don't know what happened to him. He's
he's really
home
scary
run king.
looking.
Sammy Davis Jr., very different guy, very small, weaselly black dude, good singer. Not home run hitter at all. I don't think.
Not a
Probably.
home run
I'm pretty
hitter.
sure he can hit the ball past the second base.
Oh my God, that's I know who you're talking about now. Very
If you
skinny.
ever research him, Sammy Davis Jr., that dude is a piece of work. And he had a song in the 70s called "The Candyman," and there's some pedophilia. Anyway,
No.
Yeah, so that's a whole.
Sorry.
whole-
Shout out to Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, I don't
My
think
bad.
so. I think he's still Catholic, but even though he's turning white.
But he's
I don't think-
Caucasian, but
I don't think he's Jewish.
really Catholic. Unbelievable. Okay,
He's on
please
time.
continue.
What we're saying is he's on time.
Yeah. He makes it everywhere on time now.
So my point is that Messianic Jews are people who are ethnically or culturally Jewish, but also who believe in Jesus. So obviously you can be individually saved as a Jewish person, but I mean corporately, right now, if you are a Jew religiously, then you don't believe that Jesus is your Messiah. You're still waiting for the Messiah. So Paul says that all of Israel will be saved at the end. So that means that the people who are holding out, who are still blinded, and that blindness, by the way, is the reason it's just, Top, is because they refuse. It's like with Pharaoh's hardened heart. Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and God says, "Okay, well, that's just because you're being stubborn, so I can harden your heart." It's not like if you're a Jewish person, if you reject Jesus, it's not because you don't know him. You've heard about him. You could find out about him easily. You just don't want to. So you're choosing this. You're choosing not to do. I mean, the Apostle Paul was a Pharisee, but he knew in his heart that Jesus was real until he had to get knocked off his donkey, and he finally accepted it. But he was fighting against it. And I think a lot of people, my old mentor, Chuck Missler, he went to Israel a lot, and he would tell me about certain rabbis who admitted to him in private that, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah, but I can't do it. I can't believe in him.
That's crazy.
Well, why not?
They literally said that. They say, I looked at the prophecy in Daniel, and I did the math that, the only person who could have fulfilled all of the prophecies of the Messiah had to have been in the first century, and Jesus is the only one who could fulfill it. But I just can't, because I can't believe what the Goyim believe.
Oh man, that's crazy.
So,
You know what? It's also significant that, like, even though this is a strong delusion that's set on them, and that as a whole they're not going to realize this until potentially the millennial kingdom. It's also very much a sort of a test to us too, right? To the Goyim, because what it does is it gives you justifiable, in your own mind, justifiable reason to resent them and to even hate them, right? Because it's like, look, they're not only are they not recognizing that Jesus is the Messiah, but look at all the things that they're doing, right? And all the stuff that I've been talking about, where all the Jew noticing stuff. So it's like, I found recently that's one of the most dangerous things, is when you feel justified, you feel like you understand the truth and that you reside in it, and therefore when somebody comes against you, you allow that spirit of like anger and resentment to come in because you feel justified in your position. So
Right.
it's as much as it is a curse on them, it's also this like test for us, right? It's like, do you bless them anyway, even though they piss you off endlessly? And it's like every day now, especially in 2025, we're inundated with all of their missteps. Every day they're highlighted on Twitter. Every day you get to see the way in which they egregiously trespass against you.
Well, they tell you themselves, right? Like what Ed just said, like, I can't believe in this because the Goyim believe in it. And it's like, you know what? In a sense, it might even come down to the name of this show, like this Nephilim Death Squad idea, where if it was in the days of Noah the way we think and describe, then that means that the Jews were out there, or the Hebrews, whatever you like to call them at the time, they're out there doing battle against literal bloodlines of the fallen angel. So if they see you as that, and they still do, this is a problem. And then that goes to the, like, what's his name? Joel Thomas, where we're talking about the good Nephilim and things like that. David's mighty men. Like, like, were there good Nephilim, the mighty men of David, where he has like a lion-faced man of Moab fighting in his army? Is like, well, what is that? Is that a Nephilim that converted to the other side, and can they save their souls? And there's even a Merkel hat on a guy. He's one of these like biblical historian theologian types that goes through some of these old texts, and there's like correspondence between priests of different lands, and they're talking about things like this. Like Saint Christopher had a dog-headed face, and okay, think about whatever you will, but there was a debate between them, like, are these things eligible for salvation? Do they have a soul that can be saved?
Right. And if Jesus is there and to redeem humanity, can these things be redeemed through Jesus?
Right.
And
it's a huge question, especially when you got them looking at us like that, the other. I kind of get it, but I disagree. I don't feel like an animal at any point, or a Nephilim.
No, well, because God never said if you weren't a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you were less than human. That's when that's religious. That's when you take the word of God and you take it to an extreme in order to make yourself feel more holy. Well, we're God's chosen people, which means if anyone who's not God's chosen people must not be human, or must be less than that. And God says specifically, I wish I had the verse in front of me. I actually had it when I was doing my show. God says, I did not pick you because you were better than anyone else. I picked you for the opposite. I said, because you are the worst. You are a bunch of backward, stiff-necked people. So God was basically saying, I picked the worst of the worst to be my people, so that people would say, well, if God can save them, he can save anyone. So that's God says blatantly, I didn't choose you because you were the best. I chose you because you were jackasses. And they were constantly. And that is really our Laura Loomer. Huh?
Laura Loomer can be redeemed through Christ too. She just got a real rough face.
When you look at the Old Testament and all the times the Jews were screwing up, and what that tells me, that gives me a really deep insight into God's mercy. I'm like, you were so merciful to these people. You did so much for them. These 10 plagues, you brought them out of Egypt with this mighty hand, and you did supernatural stuff. You fed them in the desert. You gave them food and water. You defeated their enemies for them, and they still screwed up and started worshiping other gods the first chance they got.
That's interesting.
If you're merciful on them, then God, you're going to be merciful on me for my screw ups. That's what I think. That's why I think that's the reason. So for someone to think they're better than someone else because they're the chosen, but God says, this is why I chose you.
Wow.
I chose you because you guys suck.
That's crazy. I kind of love that attitude. That makes a lot of sense, though. That makes
the attitude of why all these who you said was the most anti-Semitic. Which king was that?
No, I said God was the most anti-Semitic because he's the one.
no, but like
if you read the book of Jeremiah, for example, where he basically, and here it's tough because if you read it in the vernacular of the King James or in the King James derivative, it's very polite English. But what he's really saying, and I'll bring the verse up and I'll send it to you guys. You can send it out to your listeners later. Basically, he says that Israel, you're playing the harlot. You're a whore. He's calling Israel a bunch of whores, and he says you sit under the tree waiting for someone. When you read the actual language, he says you're sitting under a tree with your legs open, waiting for someone to come by. That's what God is saying to his chosen people. You're such whores because prostitutes would sit under a tree waiting for a guy to come by. Basically, if you saw a woman sitting under a tree looking provocative, that means she was a prostitute. You can give her some money and have sex with her. He was saying, you guys are sitting under the tree with your legs wide open for anyone who comes by. That's what God said about his chosen people.
That's crazy.
Why would you get on a high horse and think you're better than anyone else when God calls you a whore who's spread eagle under a tree, giving it away to anybody who comes by?
But that makes total sense, right? Because there's real beauty in that, right? In the sense that, like, it's like you said, if my mercy extends to even these people, then look how forgiving I can be, and it really shows you like anybody is eligible for salvation. But also, yeah, I mean, you're chosen because of how much you suck. That's wild.
I
He says, I chose you because you were the lowest of people.
I just Googled like when Israel is called a harlot, and first ChatGPT said, let's keep it respectful. And I was like, no, I'm looking for scripture. And it's just giving me like 4 or 5 different instances. I'm like, well, this doesn't help. So it's not just once.
He doesn't want you to know that. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a number of times that he's called them whores in some form or fashion.
The book of Hosea. Hosea was obedient. He told Hosea to marry a prostitute in order to help Israel understand how he feels about them.
Wow.
Damn.
That is literally what he does. And this so Hosea marries this prostitute, and as a prostitute does, she continued in her ways, and he said put her away, but then come back and love her later. Because God was demonstrating his relationship with Israel through Hosea. So Hosea, I think her name was Gomer, which is not a very feminine name, but Hosea married her, and she cheated on him because she was a harlot.
Right.
But then he was upset and he was heartbroken, but God said, go back to her and love her and bring her back in and raise the kids.
Can I ask you something? So this is going to be a little bit of a deviation, but I heard Sam Hyde say something recently that I thought was interesting, and I wondered your thoughts on it. But this idea that Abraham, is commissioned to sacrifice his son, and then God stays his hand and gives him an alternative sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And then later on, when Jesus is sacrificed on the cross, it was God's way of showing you, like, look, I called you to do this thing, and you're an obedient servant, but I stopped you because I won't ask that of you. But I will do the thing for mankind because I love, I love man so much so that I'll do the thing that I stayed your hand from doing. Does that track in your opinion?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. That's completely true.
That's interesting.
And also it was the same mountain, the mountain or the hill that he was going to sacrifice Isaac on was right outside of Jerusalem. It was Golgotha.
Wow.
Jesus was sacrificed on the same mountain where he asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And by the way, just to put a capstone on that, you see later in the book of Hebrews that it gives more detail about that. Why would Abraham even agree to do that? Because Abraham, by this time, he had so much faith in God, and he knew that God made a promise that he would bless the world through his son. He said, well, God, if you kill him, if I kill him, you got to resurrect him. That was Abraham's mentality. He's like, this is on you, God. So I'll do it because I know you have to bring it back because you can't break your promise. So that's why Abraham was willing to do it.
All of that is gangster.
It's an intense knowing of that. That's what you talk about a lot, like the character of who God is. And if you understand that, then you could sort of predict, right?
So I want to touch on something you said before, topic about the Nephilim. And I don't believe that they can be saved because, again, Jesus did not die for them. But as far as, and I don't believe that they're capable of being good because their spirit, because of the way they exist, they don't have it within them to be outside of their nature. We can choose to be good. They cannot. They don't have that free will because their spirit comes from the fallen angels, and the fallen angels don't have that free will. That's why. Now, as far as the mighty men of David, those were human beings. How do we know that? Because that term mighty men, it was used, or Gibborim in Hebrew, it was used for the Nephilim in that context. But mighty men does not always mean Nephilim. For example, Nephilim means the fallen ones. So you can also say that someone is fallen without them being a Nephilim, without them being a descendant of the fallen angels. Just how someone can be a mighty man of valor without being, again, an actual Nephilim as we think of them. So David's mighty men were human beings.
Interesting.
Well, how about
you have to look at the context.
Here's a question: when you have these Nephilim, they continue to water down their bloodline. At what point do they become human? If you continue to take human wife, it's like
that's a good question. That's a great question. I'm not sure what the line of demarcation is, but I believe that there is at some point where you're completely human, or you're considered human in God's eyes. I don't know what that line is. I really don't. I'm not going to lie and pretend that I know, because I'm sure there are lots of people who still have remnants of the bloodlines in them.
We talk about this story, and it's just a story, so it's anecdotal in its nature, but this is one of these episodes that we heard on Tony Merkel's show. This woman that was having like prolonged exposure to a Bigfoot outside of her cabin, to the extent where she feels as though she developed a relationship, and not like the weird relationship that they write about in the women's novels, but like, just one where she gets to know this thing to some degree.
Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, not that kind of. You know how hard it is to tell my wife like Beast was weird and like Gaston was probably pretty base. He seemed like a good guy.
He's like, we got to kill this Nephilim.
Yeah,
Like,
and that
probably.
Belle was like, "What are you doing, girl?" But over some time, this thing allegedly, take it with a grain of salt, tells her that it is what is known as an Eliud, and that it is seeking redemption. And so that first you have to buy that that's even true, and then second you have to buy that thing told the truth. But this idea apparently does exist in the Bible, the Eliud being like some distant offshoot of the Nephilim, potentially like, a watered down bloodline or something like that. And it's just interesting that she wasn't like into the Bible. She wasn't a Christian, this woman. She's just telling you about her weird shit. And then it wasn't until like later on that somebody was like, oh, that word Eliud, that's very fascinating. So, but the idea that it was seeking redemption is interesting as well. So I just wonder about that. Like, can it get, you talk about the point of demarcation. Can a bloodline get to the point where maybe enough of its genetics are removed from the equation that it could even consider redemption in some way, shape, or form? I don't know, but fascinating idea.
Yeah, so here are my thoughts, and again, I'm not being definitive here. So if someone disagrees, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to fight anyone on this. So we look at the first advent of the Nephilim during the time of Noah, and before that, you had the fallen angels coming down, having intercourse with women, producing these entities. They were wiped out in the flood. Then of course you have another incursion, but it wasn't nearly as prevalent. So while you would have had an entire population of Nephilim before the flood, afterwards it seems to be very, very specific and very intentional. For example, Nimrod became a Gibborim. We know that has to do with the Nephilim because it was the same. It was only a couple of chapters later within the same context. But then you have the kings of the earth. Many of them either being Nephilim or having those bloodlines in them, but that's all intentional. Like the pharaohs, the reason they have those headdresses with the cone shape on the back is not just because it was a nice headdress. I think it's because they were deformed to that degree because they had some Nephilim blood in them. I think my opinion is that people who have Nephilim blood in them now, and there are those bloodlines, those are intentional bloodlines. So I think they're going to be very few and far between. People who are royals, and some of them admit this, like Queen Elizabeth, before she died, she was on the record as saying that she can trace her bloodline back to the ancient kings of Sumeria. I don't doubt her. They probably were. And that's why they intermarry. They're trying to preserve the bloodline. So I think they want to keep that bloodline as pure as possible. So while there may be some people walking around with some remnants of it, I think they're very few and far between, my opinion, because I think that they are intentionally trying to preserve those bloodlines. That doesn't mean there's some offshoots that don't happen. Let's say someone like, I'll give you an example. You guys know about Kathy O'Brien, who's very well known for her book Transformation of America.
Yeah.
And she was, part of SRA because her bloodlines, there was some royal bloodline in there. And so they only wanted to do these rituals with her because she probably had some of that blood in her, and it made her a better conduit for the demonic stuff they were doing. Now, I don't believe she's a Nephilim. I think that, and I don't know if she's a Christian or not, but I know that the guy who rescued her, there's a lot of controversy about her. My point is that I think she's human, but there was some of that bloodline in her, which is why she and other unfortunate victims of this are targeted, because they have that bloodline in them. So she probably has some spiritual things that resonate with her, like this lady with the Bigfoot. She may have some of that in her bloodline, but I think that I think that as it becomes more diluted, I think that you can get more to the human side, but I don't think there's a lot of folks like this. They guard their bloodlines like pretty fiercely.
I would imagine that's the case. Yeah, they're not trying to publicize that. But I do think that there's probably some room for like a kid that's born that way, and then how often do children rebel against their parents? It's some kid that ends up being like, yeah, this is not for me, because that's always the gamble, right? And the gamble for them, you'd imagine, is like they go through all these lengths to try to preserve that bloodline, and then it just takes one rebellious child to go, I hate the way my family drinks babies, and and then deviates from that probably forever, and then goes off and spills the beans. But yeah, I would say for the most part, you're correct. They're obviously hiding that to the best of their abilities.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about Christian Zionism, because I already got into the replacement theology, so I don't want to be one-sided. So Christian Zionism takes the exact opposite point of view. Instead of saying that Israel is irrelevant, God's done with them. And by the way, let me wrap up the replacement theologies with this: is that replacement theology it started with Augustine, but it was embraced passionately by the medieval church, by the Catholic Church, because it worked in their favor, because they could say, well, we are the new church. We are the only ones that have God's favor. All the promises are given to this church, the Catholic Church now. And what's very interesting is replacement theologists, they love to embrace the blessings in Deuteronomy chapter 28. First 15 verses are, God says, you'll be blessed coming in and going out. You'll be blessed in the field. You'll be blessed here, there, and everywhere in your prosperity and all this kind of stuff. That's 1/3 of Genesis, of Deuteronomy 28. The other 2/3 are curses based on disobedience. None of the replacement theologists ever want to talk about those curses because they're conditional. The blessings that God gave to Israel were conditional on them being obedient. If they're disobedient, there were curses. So I wouldn't really want to be that, because I'm not always obedient. I don't want to be cursed when I'm being disobedient. But they only want the blessings of the Israelites, not the curses. I always find
but they don't get the blessings if they're disobedient, correct?
No. Right. They don't. Yeah, if they're disobedient, they don't get the blessings. That's why they were kicked out of the land. That's why they were taken captive by the Assyrians and the Babylonians.
So what were the blessings? Basically, to multiply and be fruitful and gain access to this land, et cetera, et cetera.
And they achieved that under Solomon. Because remember, Solomon, he on the back end of his life, he completely fell away. But at first, he was a great king. And during the first half of his reign, Israel, that nation, was the richest nation in the world. Solomon's salary was 666 talents of gold. That's about 70,000 pounds of gold.
It was the golden age.
Yeah, literally. Israel was considered the great nation. People would come from all over the earth because they were so amazed. So for a brief period of time, they were fulfilling the prophets, their ambassadorship that God gave them. But then, Solomon started marrying all these other wives, and they turned his heart away from God. My point is that because they were doing well, because they did well and they were obedient, God blessed them tremendously. But they quickly fell apart, and that's how it went. So my point is, and the reason why I brought the whole Catholic part up is because, again, a lot of people who are in this hyper-Catholic bent are also very anti-Israel and very much in the replacement theology aspect of it, because they say that Israel's completely irrelevant and all these blessings are on the church. And Candace Owens herself said that. He said, yeah, she said it briefly, but it perked me up when I heard it. I'm like, wait a minute. She said, yeah, well, we've replaced Israel in God's eyes. Like, okay, well, you're listening to your priest. Good for you. But again, Romans chapter 9 and 11 debunk that. The blindness is in part until the times of the Gentiles are done, and then God will deal with Israel, because God can't break his promises. God made it a unbreakable promise to Abraham that these will be his people, and through these people he will bring in the kingdom. God can't break that promise, which means that he has to bring in the kingdom through the Jewish people, which means they have to be converted. And that's one of the points of the tribulation, is to make things so bad on them, to afflict them so badly that they finally said, okay, we get it, God. Can you stop?
It's the same thing that happened to Pharaoh, but he didn't, and then he ends up getting drowned. But that's really fascinating, because one of the last times we talked, you're like, who wants to be the Israeli? Who wants to be the Jews? Who wants to be the chosen people? Because you already have, through the new covenant, belief in Jesus Christ gets you grafted onto the tree, right? So that's such a sweeter deal than being.
The promises to the church are way better than the promises to Israel because they aren't based on our obedience. They're based on us really accepting Jesus. And, you can be Jesus's bride, you could be his buddy. Who has more access?
Right.
Because if it was the other way around, why did the disciples and the first 10 years of Christianity, why all the Jewish people saying, yes, we want to be Christians? Because they knew that the promises to the church are vastly superior than the promises to physical Israel.
That by the way, those blessings and curses, I understand how they work on like a nation level, but is there any explanation of how they work on like an individual level? So I always go back to this like idea of the Messianic Jews because I'm learning quite a bit about them recently, and I wonder, those individuals who keep God's covenant, who believe in Jesus Christ is the way. How do the blessings and curses that apply to Israel apply to them on an individual level?
Are they still part of Israel is what you're asking?
No, because, and here's the other thing that the replacement theologists never talk about, is that was part of the obedience was obedience to the law. I didn't just mean being obedient by being nice. No, those promises in Deuteronomy were based on them obeying the law. So that's how you got the blessings. And we are no longer under the law. We were in a different era. So it doesn't apply to even if the church wanted it to apply to them, then that would mean in order to get these blessings, you'd have to obey the law, all the feasts and the sacrifices, and bathing in a river when you have leprosy, and your wife being ceremonially unclean when she's on her cycle. Those are all parts of the law. If you don't obey them, then there you go.
So they're just.
So you shouldn't be like naming yourself a Messianic Jew is just kind of stupid. You'd want to be more like associated with the body of Christ rather than
a Christian.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, honestly, like
exactly.
I said, I was at a wedding recently, and they're like, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. I'm like, yeah, what? Like, what? I don't understand what the.
They wear a small hat though, right? That's what it is.
I saw no small hats.
So what is what's the deal?
I don't know. I'm not saying there isn't small hats.
What's the deal?
What's the deal with Messianic Jews? No, I mean, I've seen, my uncle wears a little hat sometimes, but there was no little hats at this event, so very confusing.
Completely derail. Well, let's talk about this real quick.
Okay. Go ahead.
Complete derailment. What's up with circumcision and why?
Why does David get a briefcase full of penis tips? Why is there's a lot of them? It's like hundreds of them or thousands of them, right? What's the deal with that?
Should we? I witnessed it because all right. So one of our new friends, Andrew Meyer, devout Jew, big Jew. Somebody I've had words with, made fun of. Whatever. We had him on the show. I really like this guy. He's hilarious. He's knowledgeable. He doesn't believe what I believe. It's fine.
A little squirmy too. Like you try to grab him and he's
like
a
little Jewy things. It's fine. It's
getting
fine.
Through your fingers. You're like,
we love the Jews. They're Jewy though. But he had an argument online with somebody else, and they're talking about circumcision. I'm just looking, and the reason I got brought up in is because I had clowned him one time about the metzitzah, however you say
it, the biting of the
biting and the sucking, and his response to me was not adequate. Andrew, he said it's like sucking the venom out of a snake bite. Then he told me to grow up, and I was like, come on, you got to come back.
Because that sounds like comedy. That sounds like a funny thing to say.
Maybe it is funny, but anyway. So now I'm
like sucking the venom out. Grow up.
I'm tagged in the post, and they're going back and forth about circumcision, and then he just tells the person, he's like, you need to talk to God about it. And I said, I'm going to talk to you about it the next time you come on, because number one, it's a little too late in the game for me. All right, that's not going down. You're not going to convince me, but I want to know why.
What
are you doing?
Let me start by saying this is not my area of expertise.
Fine.
You know, I'll do some research, and next time we talk, this will be the first thing we talk about. But my rudimentary understanding is because, of course, it's part of the law, but it was done beforehand, but before the law, and it has to do with the two things. The two things that we talked about. That thin the veil, and in between the spirit world and our world are sex and blood.
Yeah. So this is kind of both of those,
like dirty panties, you'd say.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So when you shed the blood, obviously there's blood there when you cut the foreskin, and it's also the sexual organ. So it could also. So I think just from a very high level standpoint, it's making a covenant with God using the two things that thin the veil between the spiritual and the physical realm.
Right. Interesting.
So I'm going to do a deeper dive, and because that's a good subject. Because I honestly, I'm not extremely well versed on everything about it, and I want to know more of that. So I'll dive into it, and next time we talk, I'll have some more information.
Your Google search is going to be a disaster, man. I'm going to pray for you, Feds. If you're listening,
like maybe God kind of like made it that way, and then after a few like thousands of years of looking at it, he was like,
maybe not.
If I could go back and change one thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it a turtleneck anymore. I'd make it a
maybe that's that one thing. If I could just get rid of, you know what? Why don't you guys start? We'll make it like an incentive based thing.
And also
like, bring
keep
me
in
a bunch
mind
of
that
those.
Back then, not so much now, but back then it was also a matter of hygiene.
Yeah.
Right. Because a lot of sand and grit gets in places.
All kinds of stuff gets in there.
I don't know. I always just think that was true because every once in a while, I'll see somebody having a conversation.
It's called
they'll be like,
I'm just saying they have a word for it.
Schmegma. Don't say schmegma.
It's a Jewish word.
Is it? It does sound like it's like
okay.
Schmegma.
Speaking of going off the rails, and people probably not going ever to Faith by Reason ever again after I tell you this story. There was a friend of mine when I was in college who was well known for having a pretty substantial endowment.
Nice, crushing.
And he was not circumcised. And he once told us a story about how he wanted to see how many women he could bang in one day.
Oh no!
In order to make that happen, he had to not bathe between sessions. And so we were like, dude, by the end of the day, what was in that?
He's just shaking out cheese out of the wizard's sleeve.
Just from under cheese.
From under. Oh no!
So I was like, that's disgusting, dude.
I was watching.
I hope those girls all got tested or did something.
Or at least took a bath. Don't take a shower. That's gay. So I was watching. So a couple people argue online, and they go, somebody's like, that's against Christianity, and they're like, oh yeah. If your God's so good, why then is he? Why was it David that like ended up getting a whole lot of foreskins?
Well, Saul, like he was like, if you wanted his daughter's hand in marriage or something like that,
you got to bring a lot of foreskins.
Well, you got to kill all these people, bring them. I think what was it, 100, and he brought him 200 or something like that.
Yeah,
I'll do you one better, dude.
He was basically converting them to against their will.
That's crazy. He's like, double or nothing. I'm gonna bring you. That's too easy. And I look at that and I go, "Oof! Thank God nobody's asking me because I'm an idiot and I don't have the answers for that." So I'm hoping. Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited. If you could do a little research on the old foreskin debacle, and then next time we go, if we can start off with that, that's very interesting.
I would not be consulting Google. I'll be consulting the people who I consult when I have tough questions. Yeah, we have like a little round table that we do.
What's up with
everybody sits down, they all have hoods, it's candlelight. He's like, well,
basically,
foreskin. Well, this is the topic.
Today's topic. What's going on?
We don't talk. We just pass around note cards. I will say foreskin, go.
I'm sorry, Ed.
On foreskin.
I'm so sorry for derailing you in this way.
Ed is here to talk to retards and to.
I need to know the answer to this, and it's something I don't know. I love getting questions I don't know because it gives me an opportunity to learn more. And I never thought that much about foreskins, but now I'm going to be thinking.
I would like to not, but I found it interesting because now that I have this newfound respect for this guy, I'm kind of just like, well, defend it. What? Why?
I think he's joking around when he says it's about sucking the venom out, and then he tells you to grow up.
That's
the
funny.
Funniest
it is
combination
funny.
Of that. He's very funny.
The thing is, when you're approaching it like mad, this is why I step away from it because I was kind of like getting a little bit mad at the argument because he's being slippery. It's hard to see the jokes. It's hard to see the funny when you're kind of
Yeah. Hey, Top, I got some news for you, though. Abraham was 99 when he had his foreskin snip,
not me. Not this guy. Ed, depends on what Ed says. Well,
depends on, hey, the future hangs in the balance, Ed, depending on what you say when you come back on the next
No pressure.
show.
I got to, saving the world.
No pressure. No pressure. It's just a little bit of skin. No pressure.
It's a little bit of skin between buddies.
Hey, but maybe that's where the whole term skin in the game comes from. I don't know.
That's
it could be.
Just a little bit of skin in the game.
Oh, God. This show is horrible. Ed, Christian Zionism, please.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was the thing you were talking about before. We were like, what about
Christian
these
Zionists go to the other extreme where they believe that Israel, not only is Israel important, they are the key to Bible prophecy. That they call it, God's biblical time clock. And most Christian commentators who are into prophecy believe that. Again, my old mentor Chuck Mister believed it. You got Tommy Ike and just all the you name them. They are believers in this because of, again, like the prophecy in Ezekiel 37 that made it seem like that would lead you to believe that Israel will be coming back in the latter days. It says that that this is a latter day prophecy. And the verse in Isaiah 66 that says, well, a nation will be born. Can a nation be born in a day? And can a woman give birth without birth pangs? And they look at that as 1948, when Israel literally became a nation in a day without any pain of conquest. I mean, of course, after that, there have been like constant wars. And there's also the parable of the fig tree, where Jesus says, I'll tell you the parable of the fig tree. You know that when it starts putting forth its leaves and shoots and things like that, you know that the time is near, even at the door. And Israel is called God's fig tree several times in the Bible. So they look at this is that there will be a latter day period where Israel, the nation, comes back. And I believe that as well, because it says that they will come back without the Spirit. But they take that and then they add the Abraham verse to it, and they go from blessing Israel to we have to support Israel, that we can't speak evil of Israel, that we have to help make God's prophecies come true, which is where you get into the red heifer thing, where you have the guy in Texas who, again, good Christian guy, but he says, hey, I have these heifers, I have red ones, I'm going to send them over there so that they can use them to anoint this new temple that he believes is going to be built. And I believe it too.
You know what's interesting about that, real quick? I just want to say, like, could it be one of these things where they have this red heifer prophecy, and it's like, yeah, the red heifer prophecy is what's going to basically move things along once we get these, or is it another thing where like God's like, yeah, so there is going to be a time where things are going to get moved along. Incidentally, they just so happen to collect a bunch of red cows at this time. It's going to happen at the same time. I'm not moving because of the cows. It just so happens that they're going to gather a bunch of cows and they're going to do this thing.
Right. I mean, it's not a prophecy about red heifers. It's just that in the Old Testament, in order to cleanse a new temple, you have to have the ashes of a red heifer, which are and it has to be it has to be a certain age. It can't have any like non-red hairs on it, which is difficult to do.
Right.
So I mean,
it's also very difficult to circumcise.
We're going to do research, Z-Man. We're going
no, because heifers are female. So
heifers are female. There you go. Hey, quick answers that time. That's pretty good.
See, I can go with some quick answers occasionally.
You don't have to wait till next time for that one. That's good.
I think like another question I have about the heifers, but like who knows, is like, could you get them and then get the ashes and then just hold them for a while? Like, but that's also like,
why not?
Yeah, this is like Jewish stuff too. Like they have their rules about who knows. They're like crazy. Like, well, you could hold it for a fortnight, but it's got to be in spots. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe. I have no evidence of this. I think they already sacrificed them. I think, like you said, Tom, I think they have the ashes on standby.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason that they're doing this is because they know that the Antichrist has to desecrate a temple, which means a temple has to be there. However, this temple is not from God. This is not. There's only one temple that God commissions next, and that will be the millennial temple. The next temple that's built is not going to be from God. Because I get questions about that too. Well, the Bible doesn't say it's going to be 3 temples. No, you're right. It doesn't. It only says that there's going to be the 2. The original temple that Solomon built and the millennial temple. This next temple is going to be built, but it's not going to be commissioned by God. God does not recognize it. And you could also make that argument for the current nation. And here's where I start to get into trouble with some people. When I said that yes, the physical land, this is a nation that is called Israel, that is in a portion of that land that God allotted. But if you look at how this nation came into being, there was some shady stuff going on. I mean, some seriously shady stuff going on with the Rothschilds, with the Balfour Declaration. There was some, you could argue that, I'm not going to say that it was from Satan. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that keep in mind that God is not the only one who covets that real estate. So do the bad guys.
Right.
Why do they covet it? Because that is the land where the mountain of God is, Golgotha, the mountain where Jesus was crucified, the hill rather where Jesus was crucified, the hill where Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac. That is Mount Moriah, because Abraham himself says, "In the mountain of the Lord it will be seen." where he was going to sacrifice Abraham was called the Mount of the Lord. It is so there's a battle for valuable real estate. And Satan and the fallen angels, they want it badly as well. So it would not surprise me if they were engineering this to happen. Now, granted, I think that it's that God prophesied it, but I think God may have prophesied it because he knows, hey, Satan, the bad guys, they're going to want this land. They're going to do everything they can. And eventually I'm going to allow this to happen. I'm going to allow them to have this land for my purposes. And then they're going to desecrate it. And then I will bring my Messiah. Jesus will come back and he'll wipe them all out. And then he'll set up the true land. And then that's when I will fulfill my promise of the kingdom that I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And so that's part of what helped me break this sort of spell where people, I think they have, we had Jake Shields at Bohemian Grove, and I think that he plays a role in calling this out, because it needs to be seen. It might go a little too far and people get a little confused by it, but when people are saying they're like, oh, there's nothing special about this, these people, they're this, they're that, and I'm kind of like, I don't agree. Andrew Meyer came on and he said, when you go to like the wall over there, you go to Jerusalem, he's like, you can feel it. There's something there. Mm-hmm. And, maybe you could write it off as like, well, you're a religious Jew, so of course you're going to feel certain ways, like, because you're in this place where you think. But then when you add up that, hey, Jesus was killed here. There's a lot of things that happened here. Something like transmuted this ground. It probably is special. I still don't want to send my kids to die for it right now, or period. But like something about it.
Yeah, there is something about that land. And I'll say this: I know you have to wrap things up. If you read the pseudepigraphal book of Enoch, which is the only place you can find out what demons are, you will find out that demons were congregated in Galilee. There was something about that area, and that's where Jesus did most of the first casting out of demons, in that area, and that didn't go away. There's a lot of UFO activity that happened in that area, in the area that was called Galilee. So there is some spiritual stuff. So that physical land is a character in the story of the Bible, and so that land is sacred. And
that's probably where the veil is the thinnest.
Yeah.
If there was ever a place on earth where you could say the veil is likely the thinnest here, like that would be it.
You have two mountains within 500 miles of each other: Mount Bashan, Mount Hermon, and the Mountain of God. They're both within that same little geographic footprint, that area about the size of New Jersey.
That's wild.
Right. So just to wrap everything up, both extremes are incorrect. The church does not replace Israel. Now God is dealing with the world through the church now. He is not dealing with the world through Israel currently. He's dealing with the world through the church. He did deal with them through Israel, but Israel is going to come back into play after the church age is done. On the other hand, the Christian Zionists are incorrect in that it is not wrong to speak ill of anyone who does anything wrong, because God did it to Israel constantly. So if God did it, then it's okay to say, hey, I don't like what's going on in Gaza and whatever, or I don't like the fact that, Israel has like the biggest gay pride parades in the world, or whatever you want to say. You can criticize the government.
Well, isn't it like, it's like one thing to say, these guys are morons. I really hope they figure it out. I really hope they come to Christ.
Yep.
It's funny. I was thinking about, and this might be kind of retarded, but I was thinking about the idea of states, like, the state of Israel, the state of Florida, the state of New York, whatever it is, and how they're represented on a flag, on the American flag specifically. They're represented as stars. And then you think of the stars and what are those? And when the judgment happens, those stars will fall from the sky. I was like, does the state, in a way, that word, that idea, represent? It does, right? Because you have a king, and above the king is a locality or an entity that is there to govern it in a way. So there's like, I was trying to think about that sort of connection and what the state actually is.
What other nation is called a state?
Say that again, Ed.
What other nation is referred to as a state? I hear state of Israel. But I'm asking this genuinely because it just occurred to me that it was interesting.
Yeah.
Because I heard Sam Tripoli say on his show that he considers Israel the 51st state because of all the
all the intertwined.
And he was half joking, but that's interesting because why is Israel called a state?
Yeah, you would call like the state of Ethiopia,
state of Canada. No, it's not right.
Right.
Yeah, and even in the African continent, that would make more sense to call those states, but you wouldn't call Kenya a state, would you? It's its own country.
The state of Kenya, it's a country. You would literally list it like if you were naming countries.
Weird.
That's
I got to,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, think about that.
Yeah. So
Ooh, is that
again,
like
that
a
was-
little?
Yeah,
Is that like a
I don't
little
have the
thing?
answer. That's a genuine question. When you mentioned it, I'm like, wait a minute. It is called the State of Israel, but why is it called?
Yeah,
a state?
that's almost like a psychological trick. If you are somebody who with a proclivity to support the government of Israel, then you might be a little bit more inclined to do that if you associate Israel with the word state, because the only other thing you associate with the word state is, the United States of America.
And they say Palestinian state, which I mean doesn't exist per se, but they always say a two-state solution. I just find that interesting.
That is interesting.
That is weird. I need to think about that more and look into that. But if it could just be another admission of
right
what this is,
Yeah. So I'll wrap it up with this. As far as what I believe a Christian stance should be towards Israel is that Israel, that's God's business. As a Christian, you should do what the Bible commissions Christians to do, to go in all the world, make disciples of all people, teach, preach the gospel, teach them, learn the Bible, do that sort of thing. God will handle Israel. Because once the church age is over, then we're actually going to go back to the law. That's how you're going to get saved once the rapture happens. How do you get saved without the Holy Spirit indwelling you? Well, you're going to have to get saved the same, because you'll be back under the law. God will be dealing with the world through Israel again. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are, I know, because Raven, you had your dream that you might be going through the tribulation.
Yeah, what's weird is how many people have reached out since then and said the same thing. It's very
interesting.
Yeah, it was like they also have the same sentiment, like, oh, I've never told anybody this, and this is the first time I'm hearing anybody else express it. I'm like, that's strange. I don't know what to do with that information, but it is weird.
So I'll say the church, let God handle Israel is my bottom line to it. It's not our business God doesn't need our help to make prophecies come true.
Right.
He doesn't need us to give money. If you want to give money to him, give money to him, but it's not mandated. You're not disobeying God if you are ambivalent about what's going on there, or if you don't like some of the things that the government is doing.
God also doesn't call you to damn them either.
No, neither.
But you could ask him to stop poisoning.
Yeah. Well, you can say, hey, you guys are doing bad things. Can you stop doing that?
Don't pour poison in that well.
Right. Exactly. But Israel is God's responsibility, not ours. We're in the church age. We should be doing what the church is supposed to be doing.
That's it. Yeah. That's it's interesting. A lot of people are sort of finding themselves in alignment with Christians who don't quite seem to understand. And I'm not saying that I understand either, but there are Christians who don't understand, who are, I guess, cursing Israel, and then there are people who are not Christian who are in alignment with them. And that should cause you pause. You should look to your left and look to your right and go, wait, why am I saying the same thing that people that aren't even Christians are saying right now?
And I get it. Don't you get it? Like
I get it.
Yeah, I see both sides. I see why people are so vehemently anti-Semitic, and I also see why people are confused by this prophecy in the Schofield Bible.
Very confusing. Oh yeah, we can get into that. We can talk about that the next time. I know we have to wrap up. We can talk a little about.
Well, don't forget, we've got to leave room for foreskin.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and of course, we'll talk Schofield and foreskin. That'll be the next.
That is, hey, people are excited. I'm excited to talk Schofield and foreskin. Probably some tremendous overlap there.
And I'll say this: my biggest confusion that I have not come down on one way or the other is, again, who are the Jews?
Who are the Jews? Yeah.
I mean, seriously. I mean, the Khazarian stuff that I've studied, and I've heard arguments both sides, very good arguments on both. Are the people who are currently occupying that land, are they Semitic? Are they the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or are they from Central Europe? I mean, Central Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I don't know. And if they're not, then do these promises even apply? And to what degree do they apply? And it is the blindness, the fact that we are blinded to actually who the Israelites actually are. I don't know. It's very confusing, and I pray.
It almost tells you
just tell me who they are.
It almost tells you, like, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation topic, and I'm all about having it. But as far as like real focus and energy, it tells you that that's not where it's supposed to be. Your focus, your energy is supposed to be, Jesus Christ. But I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to unpack some of these ideas.
And maybe that's why God hasn't revealed it to me, because he's like, it's not your business. You worry about the church. I'll worry about Israel, who they are and who they aren't. You just do your thing. So
yeah. It's almost like God saying, like, who made the promises? Who issues the blessings? Who issues the curses? Where were you when those were made? And it's like, okay, yeah, I guess I wasn't around, huh? So, all right. Well, I'm looking forward to the next one. Schofield and Foreskins. That's probably, we could already title it Schofield and Foreskins. One more time, Ed, before we get out of here, where can everybody find you?
Sure. Faithbyreason.net's a legacy site. Also go to, I should pull that up. So that's my site where all my research is for 10 plus years, working on 15 now. And go to my Patreon. That's where you can interact with me. It's where you can ask me questions. I will answer them. Even foreskin questions, I'll answer those as well on this night. Bonus episodes, material drops there first. You can be part of the Bible study where we go through the Bible from the supernatural point of view. All my books are there. You can get them either free or discounted based on your tier level. And yeah, there'll be more books coming out from there. So yeah.
There you go, guys. Go to Faith by Reason on Patreon and ask all your bonus skin questions. That's really what it is. Just bonus skin. It's just extra skin.
Bonus skin, exactly.
Guys, thank you.
It's the appendix of the sex organ. There you go.
You don't need it. You don't need it.
You don't need it.
Ed, thanks for coming on, man. This has gone completely sideways. Guys, we'll see you later. Bye.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. You can persuade them that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see.